Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Today I'm going to start chapter 2. It's a method of research. And before I get started, I need to mention a couple of things. This is a very important chapter. And when we talk about the first paper of sociology, RP1, so the first paper consists of two chapters. The previous one we have already completed, right? The socialization, and know this chapter, it's a method of research. So if you people are able to understand and learn both these chapters, so it will be very easy for you to attempt your P1 at the first paper of AS level. Let's get started. Type of data, methods, and research design, the difference between primary and secondary sources of data, and between quantitative and qualitative data. So basically, today I'm going to start with what is the difference between the primary data and the secondary data, and secondly, what is the difference between the kind of data, because we people try to investigate through different kind of data. Once it's all about numerical data, and sometimes it's all about emotions. So emotions cannot be used in numerics, and numerical data cannot be transferred to emotions. So the very first thing is the primary data. What is primary data? Primary data involves information collected personally by a researcher. The researcher may use a range of methods such as questionnaire, interviews, and observational studies. So, what is primary data? The primary data is the data which is collected personally by the researcher. So, for instance, I'm going to research, and I'm planning to collect any kind of data. So, the data which I collect by my own uh, is called primary data. And obviously I will use some tools to collect data. The sources are the methods to which I can collect my data. It is possible like questionnaire. I can simply reach to people and they simply ask questions, where they belong, what are their favorite things, I mean, what is their ideology about life, and blah blah blah. There's dozens and dozens of questions which can I ask through questionnaire. One thing. Secondly, it is even possible I can talk to the group of people like an interview. It's all about pre-planning. This is interview. Thirdly, it's observational studies. What is observational studies? I want to know something about people, so I need to watch people by a distance. Even it is possible I can involve myself in any situation to investigate about a certain issue or a problem. So this is called observational studies. So the very first thing about the data, the primary data, is the data which is collected personally by a researcher is primary data. And for example, the methods which I use to collect this data can be questionnaire, observational studies, or the interviews. So obviously there are certain things which can be you can say very beneficial when you talk about the primary data, and obviously there are certain things which is totally beyond your range. So what is the strength of primary data? The researcher has complete control over how data is collected, by whom, and for what purpose. In addition, where a researcher designs and carries out their own research, they have greater control over the reliability and the validity of the data, as well as how representative it is. So, if we talk about the strength of the primary data, it is your choice, it is your playground, right? So simply your choice. I mean, it is comparatively, you can say, easy, because you know what is the mode of your research, which is your area framework of your research. So I mean, without wasting time, you can simply switch to such thing which is essential to be collected. So this is the strategy, or you can say this is the plus point, or the strength of the primary data. It's simply your own choice. You don't need to waste your time. You simply go to people. You have a lot of things in your mind, and according to your research, you can simply ask the predefined or even defined questions to people. So this is the strength. What about the limitations? Primary research can be time consuming to design, construct, and carry out, especially if it involves personally interviewing large number of people. Primary research can also be expensive. In addition, the researcher may have difficulty getting access to the target group. Some people may refuse to participate, or in the case of historical research, potential respondent may no longer be alive. So, what is one of the limitations we people have? when we talk about the primary data, obviously, when we talk about the research, it is not possible for a human to extend to that limit so he can visit thousands of people. Obviously, it will take a lot of time. It's very time consuming. When we talk about the time consuming, obviously, one of the things which is involved in research is very expensive. Because you have to go here and there just to collect data, you have to talk to people, you have to arrange so many things for your research. So it is very expensive. One thing, it is very time consuming. Second thing, at the same time, it is even possible for you not to connect with those people which are not alive. So you have to borrow something, you have to take assistance from somebody. So after having this, one can say that there are certain limitations which are linked with the primary data. Which is not possible for a person or a researcher to go every single person to collect data. And obviously, there are certain things if you talk about the uh, historical research. So obviously, it's possible that so many people which are or which should be the part of your research are no more in this world. So this is one of the limitations. So this we have in primary data. Any question you people have in your mind, you can simply ask me right now. Right? So secondary data. What is secondary data? Secondary data is that already exists in some form, such as documents, government reports, and statistics, personal letters, and diaries, are previous research completed by other sociologists. So what is secondary data? Secondary data is the data which is already existed in any form. It could be possible that it is the documents. Documents, government documents. It could be the statistical data which is available on internet. Uh, it could be personal letters. It's diaries are the things which are already existed and you need to collect it. Obviously, it is possible for you, yet you can collect those data through a tool. Obviously, you can ask somebody, why don't you share this diary? If you people are having this diary or this document or historical pictures, there are so many things. Even pictures can be the part of secondary data which is already existed. And I must say, even it is possible when you are going to conduct a research. It is very helpful for you that if you take a specimen or paradigm or anything which is already existed, so it will give you a boost to understand how can you take up your research work. So this is we have in secondary data. So what is the strength? The researcher is able to save time, money, and effort by using existing data such as official government statistics about crime, marriage, or divorce. There must also be situations where secondary data is the only available resource, such as when researching suicide. Secondary data is also useful for historical and comparative purpose. Some form of secondary data, such as official statistics, may be highly reliable because the data is collected consistently in the same way from the same sources. This type of data is also more likely to represent what it claims to represent. So, what are the benefits? What are the strength of the secondary data? The thing I already mentioned in primary data. See that we talk about primary data. It's very the limitations of primary data. It's see that it's time consuming. Okay. Very expensive. Okay. Not possible to meet your requirements. Not possible to connect with all the source group. So these are all the limitations of primary. So the limitations of primary data is automatically is the strength of secondary data. It's in secondary data you will consume less time. You don't need to pay a lot of money, you don't need to spend a lot of money. You can simply take a benefits of the things which is already existed, as I mentioned earlier. So the strength of secondary data, it's all about the thing which is already existed. So if the things is already existed, so it will obviously save a lot of time, save a lot of money, and you don't need to work that hard to get your desired result. Secondly, the important thing are the strength of the secondary data is, they are kind of data by the government, for instance, by the government officials, you can say. So it is updated on monthly basis or on week basis or even on daily basis. so you can get the fresh data, you can get the updated data, which is very helpful, very beneficial. So if I'm trying to conduct any research, trying to conduct any research, so obviously it will take more, possibly more than a year. So if I conduct my research and it will last more than a year, it is possible that after even passing every single day, I am not able to have updated data. So if you are trying to get secondary data which is updated on regular basis, so it is a very helpful, very boostful to your research work. So what is the limitation of secondary data? Secondary data is not always produced with the needs of sociologists in mind. For example, the official definition of poverty, class, or ethnicity may be different from sociological definition. Sources such as personal document can be unreliable. Some form of secondary data, such as historical document, may only reflect the view of a single individual rather than representing a wider opinion. So, if I am talking about the limitations of secondary data, one can simply say that it is not that reliable. It is useful but not that much productive. You know why? Because see that the official statistical data simply tell us which existed by the official resources. Even it is possible, for instance, if we talk about the poverty, if I talk about the suicides, uh, so I mean obviously there are dozens and dozens or hundreds of people who are not willing to simply complain, file FIR or anything to police station or even to medical departments like healthcare departments, to let them know that there are certain people who simply commit suicide in my family. So the official data which is present are on available on internet is not that helpful. One thing. Second thing is that when the government officials try to get something or collect something, they simply collect the data. They don't figure out, I mean, how much it's helpful to a specific sociologist. For instance, if I'm trying to investigate why people commit suicides, especially the teenagers, either it is possible they break up with their partners, their girlfriends, or the boyfriends. So why they commit suicide, or they are inflation. So I mean, the data which is available about suicide, it's a random data. It doesn't cover up about the number of people who commit suicide due to the breakup. There are certain factors which are involved. For instance, even it is not you can say mentioned in the data or the statistical data that people commit suicide because they are not happy while living their parents. There is one of the factors. I mean, a couple of people commit suicide because they are frustrated by the bullying in school or colleges. There are examples, I mean, in newspaper or on social media sites. So I mean, statistical data by the government is helpful, but it is not that reliable. The sense in which it is collected is sometimes not optimistic or optimum for the researcher. So this is one of the limitations while we are talking about the secondary data. So now I simply tell something about primary data, the strength of primary data, the limitation of primary data. Whenever I talk about the limitation of primary data, obviously the strength of secondary data is all reflect the limitations of primary data. Now I'm going to start with the what is the difference, what is the quantitative data or qualitative data. So what is quantitative data? I keep on saying so many times, I mean, in my previous lectures. I mean, it is one of the things you need to understand. Whatever the terms we have, you need to consider a couple of seconds about the term. Sometimes, but to my point of view, most of the time, there are certain terms that simply tell you the whole story about itself. So quantitative data is all about the quantity. So quantitative data express information numerically in one of three ways. A raw number, such as the total number of people who live in a society. So it's all about the numerical data. A percentage, or the number of people per hundred in a population. For example, around 80% of Indians follow the Hindu religion. A rate, or the number of people per thousand in a population. A birth rate, for example, mean that every 100 people in a population, one baby born each year. So it means the birth rate is one. So what is quantitative data? As I mentioned earlier, quantitative data, it's all about the data which simply reflect us about numbers. So whenever we talk about the numbers, there are three variations in number. The raw number, for instance, if you talk about the population of Pakistan, it is 220 million people are inhabitants living in Pakistan. So it's simply the numbers, one thing. Second thing, it's all about the percentage. You talk about the percentage, it's the people percentage is all about uh, anything in terms of 100 people. So for instance, if you talk about the literacy rate of Pakistan is for instance 45%. So one can say that out of 100 people, 45 people are literate. Secondly, its percentage. First is the numerical data. Then thirdly and then lastly, we have is the rate. So what is the rate? So rate is all about the number of things in 1000. For instance, if we talk about the birth rate, death rate, in thousand, in population of thousand. So for instance, in the population of 1,000 people, every single year there are 4 to 5 people, newborn babies are there. So one can say that the birth rate is 4 to 5%. So if we simply collect data today and after 1 year we simply again collect the data, so we come to know that in 1,000 people last year, now 45% at flatline. They pay the depth of nature. They are no more in this world. So one can say that we can say the rate it's 40 to 45% rate. So it's all about the number of 1,000 people we need to investigate. So birth rate, death rate is all we done. So what is the strength of the quantitative data? I mean, what are the benefits? Why it is important to collect a data which is quantitative? Because quantitative give us a lot of clear picture. Because it's all about, see, we said that there was a road accident, many people died. So we don't give that much attention. But if we simply say, oh my goodness, means 20 people flatline in a road accident, so it simply attract us. I mean, we will become a bit, you can say, keen about to know, I mean, what happened. I mean, it's the mistake of the driver, or I mean, whatever the circumstances were. We simply this kind of events or incident take our attention. So what are the strengths? The ability to express relationships statistically can be useful if the researcher does not need to explore the reason for people's behavior. They simply need to compare numbers. So what is the strength? A very important factor about the strength is, if we know about the strength, one can say that quantitative data is all about the numbers. It's all about the toll, how what are the trends. So it doesn't give us anything about the behavior of the people. So if we are interested in numbers, we know, I mean, the rate, we know the percentage. I mean, then one can say that the statistical data always represent quantitative data. So the strength of quantitative data is all about quantity, numbers, but it doesn't give you a solution. It can simply take your attention towards a certain problem. In this year, 50,000 people flatline, commit suicide. So this, the number, the toll can simply attract our attention towards a specific why people commit suicide so much in this year. There must be certain reason. So it is important to get a data which represent quantity. So quantitative data allows sociologists to summarize sources of information and make comparisons. Statistical comparison and correlation can test whether a hypothesis is true or false. They can also track changes in the behavior of the same group over the time, a longitudinal survey. So again, it's the quantitative is one of the strengths of quantitative. Just we can correlate certain things. We can simply investigate. We can. It is very important for the comparative studies. One can say that if we simply compare certain things in last 20 years, last 10 years, one can see that things are significantly changed over the period of time. So I mean, this kind of data, are the quantitative data, is very important because it tells us the numbers, and the difference in number can play a very huge part in sociology. So quantitative research is more reliable because it is easier to replicate the studies. Standardized questions, they do not change. For example, can be asked of different groups or the same group at different time. The result can then be quantified and compared. If the answers are the same or very similar, then the research is more likely to be reliable. So one can say that, I mean, quantitative data, it's all about the reliability. I mean, we can get a lot of reliable data through quantitative. You know why? Because, for instance, in 2019, before Corona, things were like that. The population was that. GDP was that. So one, we have statistical data. Second, in next year after Corona, one can say that in 2020 things are this. In 2021 things are like that. So I mean, we can simply juxtapose certain things. The numbers, I mean, is this kind of data is very important because we have a clear, you can say, clear line, a clear direction. Either we are going up or down. Our country is getting on the route of progressive level or not. So quantitative data, it's always good for reliability. You can easily replicate. You need to pick certain sentences, you need to pick certain points when we talk about quantitative. See, quantitative, easy to replicate; quantitative, reliable; quantitative, can be updated; quantitative, comparison. I mean, easy. What is quantitative? Always reliable, right? Comparative, give us a clear picture. We can even predict by numbers. For instance, I have a show, right? So in 2020, you can say that in first year I got this kind of profit, 2022, 23. So I mean, you can have, after having quantitative data, we can predict as well. If the flow or the inflation is like that, after 6 month time, inflation will be like that. If the dollar is going down or up, after 2 3 months time, we are able to investigate certain things, right? Right. So this is important, important factors which are there in quantitative data. Reliable, one thing; comparative, second thing; easily replicated, yes, it's easy to understand. The last thing, we can simply have a comparison through this kind of data, right? Why don't you take a break for a second? So quantitative data also make it easier for researchers to remain objective. They do not need to have a close personal involvement with the subject of the study. So their personal view or biases are less likely to get in the way of intrude into the data collection process. So one of the things about the quantitative data, one of the benefits is, you can simply maneuver the data which is already existed for your research work. So I mean, once you got the data, so you can simply channelize your data. So it's very beneficial for you if you are going to get the quantitative data. What are the limitations of quantitative data? Obviously, the very first thing about the limitation of quantitative data, we people are not able to get the people's behavior. So this is one of the worst thing about the quantitative data. Quantitative quantification is often achieved by placing the respondent in an artificial social setting in order to control the responses and the data collected. People rarely, if ever, encounter situation where they are asked to respond to a list of questions from a stranger or have their behavior observed in a laboratory. Some argue that it is impossible to capture people's normal behavior or collect real responses when the subjects are placed in such an artificial environment. Quantitative data only capture a relatively narrow range of information: the who, what, when, and where of people's behavior. Quantitative data does not usually reveal the reasons for behavior because it lacks depth. The more detailed the behavioral data, the more difficult it is to quantify. As a result, quantitative data is often seen as a surface level only data and superficial. So, what are the limitations of quantitative data? As I mentioned so many times before in my lectures, it's all about the numbers, it's all about the digits. And see that, for instance, I come across 100 people every single day and I'm trying to get any kind of data. If it is possible that more than 75% people will not cooperate with me because it is not in their interest to give me answers. Even it is possible they are in a situation they can't give me time. Even it is possible, obviously, being as a stranger, they will not cooperate with me because there isn't anything beneficial for them. So whenever we talk about the quantitative data, it is reliable, yes; it's numbers, yes; replicable, yes. All these things are present in quantitative data, but the thing is, the objectivity is not there. We are not able to get a clear picture unless until we know why people commit suicide, why it's inflation, why people do certain things in certain situations. So this why is not present in our quantitative data. So this is the worst thing about quantitative data. But obviously, when we talk about the sociologists, there are certain sociologists, they keep on merging different kind of method of research just to make a clear picture. So it's almost done. Tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala, I will start with the qualitative data, which is all about the behavior. So it's time to say Goodbye to all my viewers. Take great care of yourself and the people around you. Till then, fi amanullah.